Maayong adlaw kaninyong tanan. Magandang araw sa inyong lahat. I am Ami Cabusao from Mindanao Times and welcome to the seventh podcast of the Philippine Press Institute. Actually, the July podcast of the PPI. Before anything else, this podcast is made possible through the support of the Hans Seidel Foundation that has been with us for the past 4 to 5 years. Today, we will be having a conversation on the hard look at the Mindanao growth trajectory, and we will be looking at how Mindanao fared in the past 6 years under the first Mindanaoan president and the prospects for the next years. No? Uh, we will ask the question: has the negative perception of Mindanao slowly changed over the years, with the now robust economy and the peace and security that it has enjoyed, especially with the implementation of the Bangsamoro Organic Law instituting the Bangsamoro region? We are very lucky to have with us today leaders from the government and private sector who can break down what is happening in this vast, beautiful island that has been suffering for a long time from an image problem. Our guests today are Assistant Secretary Romeo Montenegro, the Deputy Executive Director of the Mindanao Development Authority. He oversees Minda's investment promotions and international relations programs and pursues collaborations with the country's power industry stakeholders, leading Minda's advocacy work on renewable energy and energy transition. Our second guest is Mr. Tony Peralta, the chair of the European Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, Southern Mindanao Business Council, and executive director of the Foundation for Rural Enterprises and Ecology Development of Mindanao, or FREEDOM. He has a very rich experience in finance and banking, having worked as vice president in Citibank Los Angeles, California, and other banks of note in the Philippines and Singapore. He was also former deputy chief of party for the Growth with Equity in Mindanao program, handling enterprise development and microfinance activities in rural communities. Hello, sir. Hello, Sir Tony. Hello, Yo. So let's start the ball rolling. Maybe ask Yo, no, as a Kyo. So, what are the landmarks of the PRRD administration in Mindanao in terms of policies, and what has changed in the past 6 years?
Thank you, Ami, and
Yes,
mayong
yes.
adlaw sa inyong tanan, especially to the listeners of this podcast via PPI. And mayong adlaw po, I am honored to be sharing this virtual forum with my mentor as well, several decades of work in Mindanao, Sir Tony Peralta. Uh, there's quite a lot that we have seen unfolding in Mindanao in the last 6 years of the recent administration, the PRRD. And most prominently is, of course, laying the foundations of the peace process. We've had during this past administration an overwhelming voice of the Bangsamoro people for the establishment of the Bangsamoro governance framework that will provide the basis this time around for the Bangsamoro to work by themselves, for themselves, the aspirations that is in its truest sense of what they should be realizing as a Bangsamoro people in terms of peace and in terms of development. So that is essentially a very important achievement of the Duterte administration now. Insofar as pursuing the unfinished agenda of infrastructure development in Mindanao, we've also seen that being vigorously pursued along with the country's Build programs. But there are still several other specific priority projects that we hope can be carried by the incoming or this new administration. Overall, in terms of the overall economic policy shaping up in Mindanao, in terms of how Mindanao development had been accorded its necessary support by the national government, I think this can also be, of course, very much validated by Sir Tony. Mindanao has been growing consistently better than the
Mm-hmm.
national average at
Mm-hmm.
a faster rate than the national average. Or across 17 regions in the Philippines, regions in Mindanao outperform most of the country's regions in terms of GRDP growth. Even during this 2.5 year period of pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
validating that indeed Mindanao is resilient because it is drawing quite a lot of its strength in its agri-economy. And so while we had the lockdowns domestically in many markets abroad, we still continue to send our agricultural output to these markets. So
Mm-hmm.
that itself paved the way for Mindanao to perform a better showing in terms of
Mm-hmm.
GRDP.
Mm-hmm.
However, we are also affected, just like the rest of the Philippines and globally in terms of the external shocks of the pandemic and the double whammy of the war in Ukraine that led to the spiral of
Mm-hmm.
inflation and, of course, the skyrocketing prices of fossil, particularly coal, where Mindanao derives at the moment 60% of its energy requirements coming from imported coal, for instance. So,
Mm-hmm.
sayang lang, at the start of the Duterte administration, we were looking at a significant reduction in terms of our poverty incidence in Mindanao and a growth rate which was validated by major economists in 2016 that Mindanao stand to achieve between 7 to 8% GDP. But we got all sidetracked and our narrative was rewritten by the unwelcome
Mm-hmm.
visitor, which was COVID pandemic.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So let me ask Sir Tony, how does the business community perceive the economic climate of Mindanao as shared by us, sa ASECIO? Sir Ton?
Well, we've had challenges. For one, the last 6 years of the Duterte administration here, not only in Mindanao alone, but the country as a whole, has benefited from the strategy of pursuing build, build, build. That has really created a lot of confidence. It increased the confidence of the business sector. And at the same time, it also addressed some pressing needs. If we go back in history, especially from 1990 up to about, I believe, 2011 or 2015, thereabouts, your average expenditures of your infrastructure as related to your GDP was very low. It's only in the Duterte administration that we've seen such numbers go up to about 5.4 or 5.5%. No, so that these numbers again came from the Asian Development Bank in their country report. That was really something that was indeed telling. But if you look at it in terms of inclusive growth, yes, I'd say that we did benefit a lot. There's been a very good, well, the numbers at least are going down from 44% to about, I'm sorry, not 44%, but if my memory serves me right, poverty declined from 23.3% in 2015 to 16.6% in 2018. And Gini coefficient, which I had in mind, which I almost had a mistake. It's about 44.9% to about 42.7% over the same period. So clearly, if you look at these numbers, those are really good numbers to go by, in which we can really say the aspect of inclusive growth really did happen. But of course, we all know what a pandemic has done, and while the numbers as what ASECIO has mentioned, that this has shown the resiliency of the Mindanao economy. But on the other hand, based on the survey that we did, the best business sentiment survey we did with our members, with the European Chamber and the Japanese Chamber, of which I'm also part of, indicated a much more serious problem. And that has to do with supply chain disruptions. And
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
only that, but the cost of accessing or even securing container banks became an important issue. before this pandemic happened, you're looking at something like $1,500 per container for a 20-footer container van. Right now, it's like what? Almost 8,000 to $7,800. So yes, we do have that situation where we have to contend with. No, I mean, again, this is not entirely due to the governance of former President Duterte, but just like being part of the global community, we are part of an interlinked community. We have a global family which we are part of, so we obviously will get affected. But what I really see here and encouraging was that the litmus test of the pandemic has really showed how resilient our financial structures are. Because mind you, I was really, really worried. But when the numbers came out, which was really an indicator of how strong we are, our capital adequacy ratios for banks were on the average at 16 to 17%. We've maintained the BSP requirements for the banks to operate, meaning to say they have adequate capability. Then the other indicator is the non-performing loans of banks, which is now averaging, I think we're below 4.1%. So the one that was really in my mind in these things were what the impact is like for our GFIs, government financial institutions. So we have looked at the numbers of both BBP and Land Bank, and they're way below. I mean, you're looking at something like below less than 2% for Land Bank. And then for BBP, it's a little bit over 2.2%. I mean, you look at the threshold of 4%, there's still elbow room. But I hope they don't get into that, because that would really create an aspect of our credit standing getting affected. So that's it. One key move that the Duterte administration made was really push for the merger of Coco Bank and Land Bank. That was really important. Because if that did not happen, then we would have been in a deeper world of hurt in terms of the losses that we can expect from Coco Bank.
So we really had very smart financial advisors and consultants within the Duterte administration. And I've been thinking, you were talking about finances. I would like to ask Asakio on the ODA, because I think you recently had a meeting with ODA, and then to harmonize, I think, the investments coming in or assistance coming in.
Yes, that's right, Ami. Part of the fund sourcing for many of the public investments, big ticket projects that need to be implemented in Mindanao, apart from just relying on our GAA or locally sourced funds, we also have to look at official development assistance or our development partners, either via grant or via loans. And that's why over the last few decades, a sizable chunk of country strategies of specific ODAs that are implementing programs in the Philippines devote more than 50% of their country allocation to Mindanao, especially during the last recent 20 years of efforts towards strengthening the peace process in Mindanao, particularly in the Bangsamoro region. And we've seen this as a very important source of critical public investments that should come from ODAs, because there are many areas in Mindanao that you cannot expect at the moment private sector to come in, owing to a lot of factors. And that's why this is where the ODAs are very much viable in terms of filling in that gap where there is inadequacy for our local funds to be able to fund specific projects, bridges, roads, development of ports and airports, which should also be complemented by ODA. Recently, we have convened, you're right, the Operational Development Assistance. we called it the Mindanao Development Forum. This is actually a Mindanao portion of what used to be called Philippines Development Forum, where
Okay.
annually in the previous administration, all development partners converge in a forum organized or spearheaded by the Department of Finance to be able to look at trajectory of development interventions all over the Philippines, and also seizing the opportunity of commitments coming from the development partners. And we always have a portion of Mindanao as well, um, dedicated to that particular discussion. This time around, since we have yet to hear whether there's going to be a Philippines Development Forum, but we moved ahead in consultation with the National Economic Development Authority and the Department of Finance that Minda will be spearheading the revival of the what we called before as Mindanao Working Group, but now Mindanao Development Forum. This is a mechanism where everybody gets to see who is implementing what in
Mm-hmm.
Mindanao in terms of development intervention by ODA. So that number one, we are able to achieve complementation and convergence
Mm-hmm.
versus overlapping and duplication of such
Mm-hmm.
interventions if there is no coordination being vigorously worked out among the international development partners. And second, we always look at where the strategic fit of a particular ODA funding can come in to complement local government initiative as well, or a
Mm-hmm.
project of specific government agency in that particular area, where the scaling up could be achieved much better with the ODA funding being integrated into the picture. So this is essentially what had Minda been doing in the last
Mm-hmm.
several years in terms of looking at the coordination of all development partners implementing major programs and projects in Mindanao.
Mm-hmm. Is this the your plan of having the Mindanao program and projects information system? Is this the one, or is that
That's
another one?
one of the activities actually
Okay, okay.
of coming
Create
up
a system.
with the updated database,
Mm-hmm.
so that we would be able to revive what we had started before.
Oh,
Um, this time around, integrating latest technologies of our digital technology by having a GIS enabled and interactive data of all development interventions in Mindanao. So that if you
mm-hmm.
wanted to see by filter of which areas are being implemented, where World Bank is implementing projects, so it will provide you with that information in a GIS enabled platform.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Wow.
when you wanted to check where EU is or where JICA is located in Mindanao in terms of
Mm-hmm.
specific programs.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to filter bridge projects, so all projects of ODAs that are into
Mm-hmm.
bridges or roads will
Mm-hmm.
be made
Oh.
available in that particular information as well.
Mm-hmm. Can we avail of that? Is that already existing, or is that
We
existing
have
already?
we had an analog version before, but this is up for updating now under transitioning into a digital setup.
Okay, okay.
We are looking at completing this hopefully within the year, and so that
Mm.
this will become available to the public in terms of
Mm.
accessing
Yes.
latest real-time status of projects. A 100-kilometer road built somewhere in Caraga region should be able to provide an updated information as to the status of that particular road project with GIS enabled information as well.
Yeah, yeah. I was asking that because for so long we had wanted to get the figures of past assistance to Mindanao, and the impact, especially the impact assessment on the aid, especially in the Bangsamoro, because of over the past decade, parang there were so many assistance, so many donors coming in, and some of them are directly going to the BARM for specific projects. So yun yung we were very interested, and it's good to know that you're planning on it, and we expect it within the year to be finished, no? So then we would like to ask Sir Tony, no, because we understand, and as you've mentioned, that we have a very strong private initiative in the region, and despite the difficulties that we went through, we were still able to be resilient, and in fact to grow, no, even despite the 2 year Thanos snap, no? The 2 year global pandemic. So what is your parang what do you think will happen in the next years, no? The next in terms of the economy in Mindanao? Sir
Are you
Tony?
asking me,
Yeah.
Amy?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Because the video kept on cutting off,
Moving.
so I just
Okay.
wanted to be sure. Okay.
Yes, sir.
What's in for here in Mindanao? I have two perspectives to talk about, and that's really from the private sector, and of course our partner also, which is BSP, Bangko Sentral. They have become much more important these days because of the kind of challenges that we're seeing down the road. For one, as far as the BSP perspective is concerned, there are two important things that they're looking into, and one is increasing about 50 to 55% digitalization of payments. No, so this is already happening as we speak. That's one of the quiet dividends that you got out of the pandemic, because people are forced to really start looking at online payment
Yeah.
platforms where previously they did not. And
We
the
learned
other,
so fast.
yes, and the other thing also is the financial inclusion of a large part of your population. They're targeting something like about 70% people that should be in the banking system or in the formal banking system. So that's it. But if you're looking at the other, my own take on where we are going to in terms of the financing we need to get our growth, that will happen. But right now, banks are not really yet fully there where they should be, where there's got to be that increased confidence for them to pursue lending. They're right now watching more of their present loan portfolios, making sure that they are not over the threshold. No? More or less, they're able to manage this, but at the same time, it's also, in a way, an impediment to growth. But I see this as a short-term concern rather than a long-term concern. First, our financial system has really been resilient, as I said. Second, the recent stress tests, financial stress tests done on our banks, with the exception of Land Bank and BBP, the rest of the other private banks, they have more or less weathered the test, except for one small bank that did not meet its capital adequacy ratio based on the stress test. So, but that's being addressed now. And also, at the time of the pandemic, the government borrowed about 10 billion dollars from BSP. So BSP lent out $10 billion to support all these other programs, social programs of government, like the Bayanihan programs. But at the same time, I'm also pleased to tell you that the national government has paid this back to BSP. You only have a balance of about $5 billion left, $5 billion. So kung titignan natin yan in terms of where we are as far as our debt to GDP ratio, just to give you an idea, before the pandemic happened, we were hovering between 40 to 45%, the lowest that we've ever had. So that meant for all these debts that we had, as you relate it to your gross domestic product, it has not, you have more money to spend now on development, which is really the right thing, except that this thing pandemic came in, and therefore it brought us back to about 70-80% of your gross domestic product is now dedicated to debt servicing. But the policy planners see this as going down by to 60%. But a lot of people have said, okay, we have too much debt, but they forget that the whole world is like that. Other countries have about 100% to 200% of debt to GDP over na the 100% threshold. So, and yet we forget that this thing is not a national event that just happened exclusively to the Philippines, but to the whole world economy. And that's why everything now hinges really from a policy planning perspective on the condition of the health of your world economy. Because it's now, a lot of countries are really looking into, or some of them are already into recession. So
Yeah.
when you have that, and there's been talks of stagflation,
Mhm.
that is a real possibility, particularly in the United States.
Yeah.
But for us here, I think if ever it will just be a recession.
Mhm.
On how long this would be, when that would also be contingent to the events that are taking place overseas, because they are our markets. They're also a source of financing for us. So I also anticipate the possibility of even aid programs being reduced, because it affects the fiscal position of these countries if they can. And I'll take point to what happened recently about the cancellation, or how would they say it, deferral of our infrastructure projects that were financed by the Chinese government. Now, that also is a serious thing, because a lot of people are wondering why. And the only explanation I really can see from what the media is really the state of banking system. Already in some areas, there have been some bank runs, although it's not really been made, but all you can see people really, wanting their money back. When you have a situation like that, you have a bank run. And there's no
That's
way
right.
of really hiding that, no? At dito sa Pilipinas naman, really, I am pleased to say we have not reached that stage where people are forced to really go to banks and long lines and get their money back. Talagang you really can't get your money back, according to some of our contacts in Beijing as well as in Guangdong. I was on the phone with them yesterday, and they were telling me the situation is pretty serious in terms of the health of their financial sector. Okay, so yun.
So, I would just like to ask again, no, because we are an agricultural economy. I'm sure we still are an agricultural economy, and we're still, as Asek mentioned, that we were still sending our products abroad, no. So I would like to ask this in relation to food security, because in other countries they're also parang raising that parang problem in the future about food security. Sir Tony, kasi you're the executive director of a very good program, yung Freedom. And that's agricultural, sir, di ba?
Okay, the issue on agriculture here and how to develop, because really it pains me to see that the same problems that we've had in the 80s to the 90s, even to the present, seem to, you look at those problems and you mirror that to the present reality that we have. Very little has been done, except that the only thing that I see here is the aspect of climate change, which is now really affecting us. 20 years ago, we didn't have that. 30 years ago, we didn't have that. But we already had problems with our farm-to-market roads, access to credit, access to markets, and trying to look at the situations. Although now I think we are now likely to really address it seriously. We are now looking at it from the perspective of a agricultural value chain. The problem is really the kind of deficiencies that you see in the chain itself. And some of our farmer groups are not really part of the value chain. So that itself is a problem. No? So yeah, as far as what needs to be done as far as agricultural development is concerned, there's got to be really more investments that are really viable in the first place, making sure that there are really markets for where we invest our infrastructure in. While I can admire, we should bring it to less developed areas, but I still believe that this should be linked to markets. Because if we don't have the markets there, you wind up. Okay, I'll give you a good example. Let's take a look at Polyok Port. That Polyok Port was there as early as the time of then Ferdinand Marcos, the father of BBM, and that was constructed then to address a lot of disparities on economic development. But look at the cargo that go back and forth. It's very minuscule compared to what you see in other ports of General Santos and Davao, or for that matter, even now with the booming trade that I'm really seeing in Davao Occidental through the Malalag port. So again, very important makonsider natin yung location economics of where we really put our investments. I'm not saying that they should not be, that we shouldn't pay attention to that, but given the limited resources, I think there's that need to really strengthen already our existing infrastructure. No? And for infrastructure like that can follow, I really believe that money will be there. I'm hopeful that the economy would recover and that our fiscal position would be back to or even be better than it was before the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sir Tony. I would just like to ask you, talking about markets, what happened to we had an attempt, no, to send our products to BIMP Yaga, to our neighbors, no, at the BIMP Yaga. What is the development of that?
Yeah. The strategy for BPIAGA has always been mirrored with what is being pursued at ASEAN level. So when we talk about BPIAGA, it's only Mindanao and Palawan on the part of the Philippines doing cross-border trading with our neighbors, which is proximate to us across the borders of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the entire Brunei Darussalam. And the idea has always been from the start, since its inception in 1994 during the Ramos administration, was to look at where we can complement each other's products and then directed towards bigger market destination. And so it's not always looking at what we can sell and what we can buy from them, but what we can put together as a complementation of commodities directed to the bigger market. And what are our handicaps in Mindanao? For instance, we don't have the efficiency and the advanced halal system that our neighbors have, like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, which are the world's global leaders in terms of penetrating the 3.2 trillion halal market. So that's one area where Mindanao and Palawan can take advantage of in terms of getting our products in Mindanao being certified halal or being accredited with halal certifiers from Indonesia, Malaysia, or Brunei, so that it can penetrate bigger market destinations in the Middle East, such as as well as in Japan and other markets right now that put premium on halal products. Second is what we lack in Mindanao that can be complemented, but what our neighbors have. That's why from time to time, or even up to the present, we still import corn from Gorontalo in Indonesia, because our own productivity in Mindanao or in the Philippines cannot keep up with our own domestic demand by many of our feed mills and processors, and that's why we resort to importing from Indonesia, for instance. Or do we have the opportunity to source out several other of what we have, like construction materials or cement that is coming from across the border, which should tend to be cheaper than sourcing it out from somewhere else. So this had been ongoing within the discussions and then actual implementation by the private sector, although at certain scales, because number one, we look back always to the issue of logistics, the direct connectivity that we don't have compared to other traditional markets. Say, for instance, many of our products are being shipped all the way to Surabaya, which is a major hub in Indonesia, because we don't have the connectivity to Port of Bitong. Although we attempted to have that launch in 2017 to connect Davao to Bitong, but unfortunately, the continuity and the sustainability of the vessel operating that particular route had not been worked out or established. And so there are ongoing movement of products in and out of Mindanao to Indonesia. but via small vessels. Insofar as Malaysia, this has been ongoing since centuries ago already, particularly in
Mhm.
terms of barter trading. That's why when you go to
Right.
Tawi-Tawi,
Yeah.
80% of the products that you consume on a daily basis, from coffee to rice to almost everything else, is coming from across the border, which is 2 hours away.
Mm.
Than sourcing it out from mainland Zamboanga or mainland Mindanao in Zamboanga, which is 20 hours away and 3 times more expensive. That's
Yeah.
why, because of BIMP Iaga, we accord a different policy framework for the people of Tawi-Tawi and Sulu to source out commodities that are nearer from where they are, which is Malaysia.
Mm-mm.
And therefore allowing them to have that barter set up. Although it's no longer barter trade per se, where we exchange
Yeah.
our products with what they have,
Mm.
but at least in terms of policy framework, this is something that is accorded to them. Otherwise, what would happen if we compel all the people of Tawi-Tawi to buy
To get
products
them.
domestically? So they will buy rice and everything else, coffee and everything at 3 times more expensive if they source it out from Zamboanga, for instance. So
That's right.
this is the unique case of Mindanao, looking at Bimpiaga at a cross-border setup. And on a broader scale, in terms of penetrating bigger market destinations by complementing what we have with what they have. If you look at BIMP Iaga areas, including Mindanao and Palawan, together with Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei focus areas of BPIGA, we account for around 60% of the global output of food
Yeah.
commodities from three crops. In terms of coconut oil, in terms of palm oil, in terms of seaweeds, we are combined number one in the world. In terms of aquaculture products, where these areas of four countries are part of the Coral Triangle Initiative, which has the um, largest biodiversity of marine products
Mm-mm.
all over the world. We're like the Amazon of marine biodiversity here in Sulu Seas area. So that's why we stand the chance of scaling up Mindanao's opportunity to directly um, have our regional complementation with our neighbors via BIMP Iaga. Yun lang, we go back to the main issue pointed out and as it relates to food security. Our
Yeah.
challenge, not just in Mindanao and in the Philippines, is that we have a fragmented farming setup. 5 hectares here, 10 hectares there. When you go up to our neighbors, they have millions of hectares planted to one commodity alone. And therefore, they have economies of scale. Their production cost is much more competitive. Their way to mechanize the harvest is much more at ease compared to what we have in our fragmented setup in the Philippines. So, moving towards the direction of addressing food security has to take into account what our neighbors had been able to achieve in recent years, particularly on that regard. And that's why in
Mm-mm.
the case of Mindanao,
Mhm.
um, in we have to look at, as pointed out by Sir Tony, the entire production chain, from the
Mm-mm.
production to the value adding to and processing, and onwards to the export gateways.
Mm-mm.
The very reason why Dole Philippines, for instance, in Polomolok, trucks 80% of its canned pineapples all the way to Davao. That's by land, huh?
Mm-mm.
Because the port in Macarwarp cannot accommodate Panamax type vessels. So 10% lang naloload sa General Santos. All the rest are
Oo.
being trucked all the way down to Davao where the bigger ports are. And so
Mm.
in Polyok Port, majority of the agricultural commodities in central Mindanao are being brought down to Davao,
Davao.
where the big ships are, because Pulyok Port cannot accommodate, again, Panamax type vessels. Therefore, moving forward in terms of policy direction and priority, this is where we hope the national government, in this case, the Department of Transportation, can
Mm-mm.
put forward very specific priority for expanding Makar Wharf and Pulyok Port so that it can serve as
Yeah,
alternate routes and hubs for our agricultural commodities
that's
in
right.
Mindanao, making it
Yes.
more competitive globally. So that's an example of how we would want to
Yeah.
see the entire chain from production to value adding to export gateways being given such impetus by this administration.
Wow. Thank you very much. At this time, we would like to read a question. Uh, maybe for both of you. Can you list maybe 3 urgent measures that must be implemented by the Marcos administration to help Mindanao recover amid the pandemic? Are there pending measures in Congress that must likewise be passed? Yo, first maybe. Asek,
Okay,
first.
thank you for that question. Well, we definitely would like to see continuity of focus by the national government to the unfinished Mindanao agenda. We've always been stressing that whoever gets to be the president of the Philippines will have to face the same issues, imperatives, and problems that we face in Mindanao. And therefore, we don't have to rewrite the strategies because the strategies had been there. It's just that it had to be adopted by the national government. First, that the national march towards progress had to take the route of Mindanao
Mhm.
with all its handicaps. What happened in Ateneo yesterday is again a microcosm of Mindanao's peculiarities.
Mhm.
That is not a Manila issue, that is a Mindanao issue that was brought at the national level. And given Mindanao's contribution as well to the national development and its history of poverty, of conflict and underinvestment, it is imperative that the government must sustain the gains of peace and accelerating rural development in Mindanao. And with that rural development, a next very important point to that is pursuing the social bias for Mindanao. As a central policy focus for this government, that Mindanao should be given effort to accelerate its inclusive growth, one that creates more and better jobs and reduces poverty. Earlier, Sir Tony highlighted the figures in terms of poverty reduction attainment that we had in the Duterte administration. But unfortunately, in Mindanao, we only managed to reduce it from 38% in 2015 to 31% in 2018. We would have targeted at least around 22% at the end of the Duterte administration. But because of the pandemic, that also sidetracked many of the strategies. But then again, if we wanted to address poverty in Mindanao, where do we go? Rural areas where the highest poverty incidents are, and especially in the Bangsamoro, which is 50% of the population below poverty line. Therefore, the fight against poverty should be directed towards pursuing broad-based programs anchored again on what sector? Agriculture. Because
Mhm.
based on the study done with the World Bank through its Mindanao Jobs Report in 2014, Mindanao's economy is accounted for by 60% of agriculture value chain, not
Mhm.
agriculture production per se, but the entire value chain. Because
Mhm.
even if it is logistics, even if it is finance, even if it is services, but those services are coming from agriculture activities, then again, that is integrated in the entire agriculture value chain. And with 60% of the jobs created in Mindanao, or 6 out of 10 jobs in Mindanao coming from agriculture value chain, and therefore, if we wanted to create more jobs, where do we go? Agriculture value chain, because that is our strength in Mindanao.
Yeah,
Our strength
that's
is
right.
not semiconductor integration and several other strengths of Luzon. Our strength is our inherent strength in the agriculture sector, where we are top 2 in the world in terms of banana. We are top 3 in the world in terms of seaweed. We are top 4 in terms of pineapple. We are top 7 in terms of rubber and top 8 in terms of tuna. We have to
Wow.
look at how do we scale this up at a level where we would be able to have the viability of expanding such productivity and not just limited to certain areas. And the last point to that is improving Mindanao's infrastructure to the Mindanao corridor. Um, in the past, Minda had been putting forward the proposal for a corridor strategy in terms of
Mhm.
identifying priorities for infrastructure development. With a scarcity of budget, the next question is, where do we prioritize? What kind of infrastructure projects to be built in which area? Every single kilometer of road or every bridge to be built or every airport to be developed should be directly related and correlated to the kind of economic activities that it will result to once these projects are implemented. So that is under a corridor development strategy, because historically and even up until today, there's still a level of below desirable investment rate in terms of the way infrastructure our projects are being rolled out. Plus, for instance, we've been dreaming of a Mindanao railway system, the first ever in Mindanao to be ever implemented in the past administration, but got sidetracked by many other issues and eventually was part of those railway projects that were cancelled because of the inability of both Philippines and China to conclude the financing agreement for such a project. But we're also probably looking at perhaps it's an opportunity for a restart of the process.
Yeah.
And this time around, looking at several other funding opportunities for these big ticket projects in Mindanao. And across all of these strategies in terms of agriculture, in terms of logistics, in terms of infrastructure development, relate Mindanao in the bigger context of Bimpiaga and ASEAN. So that our production of seaweeds in Tawi-Tawi, for instance, is directly linked to the manufacturing centers of Sabah, Malaysia, which is just 2 hours away, rather than looking at somewhere else, because that in itself provides the viability to scale up the productivity of seaweeds in Tawi-Tawi, which accounts for 1/4 of the overall seaweeds production in the Philippines. That makes us number 3 in the world, for instance. So
Yeah.
these are essentially what we hope can be captured by this new administration.
Thank you very much, Yo. That was really great, no? And the focus is on agriculture. Sir Ton, what is your take on this? Hello, Sir Tony.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your take
As
on
follows.
the question, the 3 urgent measures that must be implemented by the Marcos
Right.
administration?
The next, the current administration must really boost investment in agriculture and manufacturing and build infrastructure that would grow the economy between 6% to 8% growth, no? Onwards to 2028. Now, farming industry output that currently account for about 40% of your gross domestic product is important, as well as the service sector that contributes also likewise to the economy. Now, I think while we do not have too much manufacturing here, we have a very vibrant BPO sector.
Yeah.
Okay? So that alone is an important development to watch. Now, I am heartened to know, I don't know if you are aware of this, but we will be having our submarine cable towards the end of 2023 to first quarter 2024. That's going to be a game changer here for our IT industry. And at the same time, just imagine this, if we consistently grow at a rate of about 6% for gross domestic product for 6 years, this will make the Philippines to be a $500 billion economy.
Wow.
Yeah. And that will really now mean that we are now in the upper middle income economy. So you're looking at incomes of anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 per capita income. So that bodes well for the move to really push hard for inclusive growth to happen. The economy can expand to at least 7% this year. That's the official growth estimate, and that's a good sign because we've really officially recovered at least from the pandemic. So government should really look at doing more with less. Okay, so there's got to be a review and streamlining of agency functions to avoid the pitfalls of an overbloated bureaucracy. At the same time, the nation cannot, and I repeat, cannot afford the removal of certain taxes from certain commodities. Because as it is, we need all the funds we need for this country to really progress. No? So while that might sound romantic, taking out the fuel tax and all, really good for the economy, or are we don't want to commit financial harakiri in that regard? So now, inflation, of course, which is also in the mind of most people nowadays, is forecast to rise to 4.2% in 2022 this year. But the good news is that this will go down to something like about 3.5% in 2023, as global commodity prices will moderate, will more or less not be that high anymore. So that's my take. I already, Flo has already covered. Well, one more thing though. What I'd like to really see in the private sector is really engaging the regional supply chains of the different countries. You see, the problem here has been us talking local chamber to local chamber to local chamber. But they don't really make the decisions on how the investments would really happen. It is your foreign chambers in these different countries, and we have already initiated. I'm happy to say that in the midst of a pandemic, we did attempt, and we will still continue, an East ASEAN Business Conference, where we have been bringing in the powerhouses like the EU ASEAN Business Council, which are really made up of the large corporates out from Europe that are based in Singapore, KL, and Indonesia. Getting to know them, finding out what were their expansion plans, and with the agenda of pushing for Mindanao MSMEs to really come in. But there's room for wiggle. That I had a discussion with Chris Humphreys, who's executive director of the EU ASEAN Business Council, and with his counterpart, with the Japanese chambers out in these countries. I think this linkage is very important to really increase private sector interest, because I think everybody knows that the private sector has not really participated in the Pimpiaga.
Yeah.
I feel sad about it because I pushed hard for that in the 90s. And to see it in its present state is really dismal, you know?
Yeah.
I was hoping of something better. Okay?
Yeah. Well, this conversation needs to have a part two. Maybe in another place, in another session. Since we're really pressed for time, I would like to thank very much Asek Yo and Sir Tony, and to those who are tuning in right now. And I hope that this discussion has helped in your understanding of Mindanao. And we would like to invite you to tune in next month, the month of August, for our 8th podcast, Philippine Press Institute. Thank you very much again, Sir Ton, Ms. Asekyo, and we hope to see you again, discuss again next time. So this is the PI podcast, and this is Ami Cabusao as your host, and tune in to the August PPI podcast. Thank you very much.